Good afternoon. My name is Joe Bandel. I am the last Rosicrucian. I thought that today I would talk a little bit about conflict. I talk about, well, Israel was just attacked by Hezbollah and Hamas has jumped in. And part of me thinks that what happened to take the media's eyes off of Russia and Ukraine, because Russia is basically cleaning Ukraine's clock, and the Western countries desperately trying to turn away from that and find a way out of the situation that they're in, and trying to, okay, let's get something else going. Also, an attempt to start World War III, something that certain groups of people in the world have been trying to do for several years. That's just my thought. For anybody that's interested in that, and my heart just goes out for the suffering of the innocent people that are in these areas of the world that are being displaced, they're being taken prisoner, they're being killed, they're being slaughtered. So that's my personal take on it. But what I'm going to talk about is the idea of combat, the idea of war, the idea of what it's about. And I'm going to be speaking from personal experience, which is kind of interesting because I'll say that even though I've been in the military and the Air Force for 8 years in the past, I've never been in a physical fight with anybody. I never found it necessary to be in a physical fight with somebody. However, back in 1991, I had a great spiritual experience in crossing the great abyss and merging, you could say, with Source. Is probably the high point of my spiritual lifetime. And what happened after that was my soul, my awareness, it actually did a polarity reversal, because I had spent, up to that point, I had spent my entire life trying to go into the light, trying to go into the light. And after that experience, I was trying to come back down to earth. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was the part of me that was trying to come back down to earth was also was bringing that light down. So I was part of that group of, you could say, light workers or whatever, that was trying to anchor light down on Gaia. But here's the point. After that happened, I had several years of almost constant astral attacks, spiritual attacks. Wake up, maybe there'd be even as many as 3 dreams in a night where I'd wake up and I'm in a fight with somebody. And I was struggling for my life. I was fighting for my life. I was not starting these fights. I was fighting to stay alive. That's how it was in the dreams. And I learned to tap into source as an energy source, as a protective source. And I never lost a fight. I never have lost one of these astral battles. Um, in the beginning, I had to flee, but that wasn't a loss in the sense that I was not injured. But I would escape upward. And then as I got stronger and stronger in the astral planes, I even reached the point where I would go, instead of going upward, I'd go down and get under people and just kind of brush them aside. So this idea about fighting, this idea about conflict, or this idea about love and peace and whatever, well, what the hell was all these literally thousands of astral attacks that I am a veteran of, to the point where nobody messes with me anymore. So this belief that people have of it's wrong to be fighting or whatever like that, it's uh, peace, love, and understanding. It's all fluffy, light, things like that. I found it necessary to fight in the astral violently and get very good at it. And I'll tell you something else. Way back then, I had a series of visions about Gaia's ascension and about the future and how it was going to play out and kind of my place in that timeline, where it went clear out to the end of the age. We're at the beginning of an age right now. And that vision that I had projected me out, took me way out to the end of the one that's just beginning. And I was fighting that whole age. And to make matter to even more interesting, near the end, I knew that I was in the wrong. I knew that there was the balance was against me, but I continued fighting, and I continued fighting, and it was like no compromise. There's no compromise possible, and I continued until finally somebody took me out, and that's how it's going to be for me for this coming age. And that's how it's going to be for the people right now that are on the other side of this. They're not going to give up. They're not going to compromise. They're going to fight to the bitter end, to the very to where they're wiped out. But there's a big difference between if you can do your fighting in the astral and if it gets down into the physical. Because I did all that fighting in the astral, it doesn't need to become physical. It's already dealt with. And all of these choices that are in the timeline, it started out way at the top, at the higher levels, and it's gradually worked its way down. And when I talk about timelines and I talk about everybody's individual timelines, Well, a timeline exists in the spiritual planes, which is the North Pole planes, basically, as opposed to the magical planes, which are down at the South Pole. And what is in the South Pole is not the timelines. That's where you can possibly modify a timeline. You can make a choice here, make a choice there that changes things. But in the long run, the ultimate timeline, the life choice, the choices for your lifetime or for the series of lifetimes through this next age, uh, they're going to remain pretty much unchanged. They're the blueprint, if you will. It's like the blueprint for the future, your soul's future through the coming age. And what we think of freedom, choice, and all this stuff, that's more like down at the magical planes is where those things happen. And it's kind of like, well, certain things are going to happen because they're in your timeline, but you still have a choice of kicking and screaming or gracefully accepting them, learning from them or not learning from them. That kind of a thing. So the energetics of this age, this new age that's here right now, the best thing that you can do is to not get caught up in somebody else's drama. Go for the goal single-mindedly, even though everybody else is trying to draw you away and get you caught up in some stupid drama or conflict. Like they're trying to start a war with this stuff. Or like Hitler did with the Reichstag, the parliament building in Germany. They set it on fire and they blamed it on another country as an excuse to start a war with that country when they did it themselves. And there's, in my opinion, credible evidence that there's a lot of fishy stuff that happened at the 911 with the Twin Towers when 3 planes got hijacked. 2 of them hit 2 buildings, but 3 buildings fell. The 3rd plane that was hijacked was forced to crash land, even though the building fell. I mean, to me, there's a lot of evidence that we were behind that as an excuse so that we could go to war with Iraq. I said it right this time, not Iran and Iraq. It's hard to get some of those confused. And those weapons of mass destruction that were never really there. If you want to know what's evil in this world, you can talk about the military-industrial complex and the politicians that are part of it. So what's happening is, and I've been seeing this for several years now, damn, they're trying to get World War III going. and it's not catching. They're trying to ignite the masses. I was just reading about Egypt. We're talking about, okay, Israel was attacked, and Israel has declared war on Hezbollah, no, on Hamas. Well, probably on both of them, but on the one that's based there in Lebanon and has been supported by Iran. Israel has been itching for an excuse to go after Iran for a long time. And it's interesting that it's just happening now when the war with Russia and Ukraine has just become a disaster for the West and for NATO. And isn't it interesting where you have the BRICS nations are just opening their arms to the Arab countries, which is going to be devastating to the Western economies, to the dollar. Let's face it, the United States is losing its dominance in world affairs, and it's going to continue to decline, and it doesn't like it. So what can I take away from all of these things? I can say that, you know, in my personal experience, I really am against war. I'm against violence. But I've experienced thousands of astral attacks where I had to fight for my life. And I ended up getting pretty good at it. So you need to be prepared to fight for your life one way or another. Just don't go out looking for a fight, I guess is the point that I'm at. And in my last video, I was talking about how the main events in our lives are crystallizing around us as we speak. And what I sense happening is what's crystallizing is there's a lot of people that don't want war. There's a lot of people that don't want war. And whatever is going to come out of this thing with Israel, it's not going to work the way that these warmongers think it's going to work. It can't, because the dynamics, anybody that's drawn into a controversy, that's drawn into an attack, it is mutually self-destructive. Every astral conflict that I was drawn into was destructive. It hurt me in a sense that, man, it totally took my energy out. I happened to have more energy than the other person, and so I recovered. Because that's the nature of these conflicts. It takes the power that you have and takes the power the other person has, adds them together, there's a big explosion. Whoever has the most power comes out ahead. Or whoever can recover the fastest comes back, and then it finishes off the other person. It's let's face it, in nature there is a violence. You know, what is this violence about? And how does that tie in with duality? And the two kinds of duality. There's the duality between male and female, which could be a loving embrace, or there's the duality with enemies that are trying to annihilate each other. What happens is there's a polarity, there's a voltage. and there's two opposites, and a voltage builds up and an opposite voltage builds up on the other side, and it builds up and it builds up until it becomes unbearable. And when it becomes unbearable, a spark jumps. And that spark is lightning. And that lightning is destructive. And the only reason it exists is because there's no other way to get across. And it needs to get across. Later, when there's bridges built between the two, it can be more gentle. It can be more loving. But in the beginning, the lightning, the thunderbolt strikes because it's the only possible way. And spiritually speaking, metaphysically speaking, occult speaking, that lightning strike is the wrath of God. That's what people have called it. And the wrath of God happens when there's no other way. We need to be thinking about finding ways to build bridges and not about conflict. There's a difference between going for the goal and being attacked and needing to defend yourself, or spoiling for a fight and trying to detract people from it. Anyways, that's my thoughts on this. A lot of that's from personal experience, just what I'm thinking. You figure out for yourself what you believe.